The Galactic Council chamber hung in the darkness of deep space like a giant silver jewel. It was enormous, bigger than most cities, and it had been built thousands of years ago as a place where different alien races could meet and talk instead of fight. Inside the main hall, representatives from over 50 different species sat in their special chairs, each one designed for their unique body types. Some delegates floated in gravity bubbles. Others sat on platforms of ice or fire. The air itself was carefully controlled to let everyone breathe comfortably. But today nobody felt comfortable. Ambassador Keela stood in the center of the chamber and she was shaking. Her people, the Tauren, were known across the galaxy for their calm and peaceful nature. They had violet skin that usually glowed softly, but right now Keela looked almost gray with fear. Her hands trembled as she held a small data device that showed images of burning worlds. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked with emotion. "You have to help us. The Krulthar swarm has already reached 6 of our colony worlds. 3 billion of my people are dead. Just gone. Consumed. We need help right now before it's too late." She pressed a button and holographic images appeared in the air above her head. The council members watched in horrified silence as the images showed what the Krulthar did to worlds they invaded. Entire cities were stripped down to bare rock. Forests, oceans, mountains, everything was devoured by the endless swarm of insect-like creatures that moved across planets like a plague. The council members shifted in their seats. Many looked away from the images. They had all heard stories about the Krulthar swarm and every story ended the same way, with death and emptiness. The Krulthar were unlike anything else in the known galaxy. They weren't interested in conquest or resources or territory. They simply consumed everything in their path. They were like a force of nature, a living disaster that couldn't be reasoned with or stopped. Hundreds of civilizations had tried to fight them over the centuries. None had succeeded. Chancellor Vorn slowly stood up. He was from a species called the Crystalline Collective, and his body looked like it was made of living diamond. Light bent and twisted through him as he moved, creating rainbow patterns on the walls. He was old even by his people's standards, and he had seen many terrible things in his long life. "Ambassador Keela," he said gently, "we all feel deep sympathy for what your people are going through. The loss of 3 billion lives is a tragedy beyond words. But you must understand, the Krulthar swarm cannot be fought. Every species that has tried to stand against them has been destroyed. Engaging them in battle would be suicide for any fleet we could send." "Then what are we supposed to do?" Keela's voice rose with desperation. "Just watch as they eat our homeworld? Our families?" Another council member spoke up, a being made of swirling gas who communicated through color changes. "We must focus on what we can do. Evacuation. We can send transport ships to help move your people to safe worlds." Keela laughed, but it was a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Evacuation? Our homeworld has 200 billion people on it. The swarm will arrive in 2 weeks. How exactly do you evacuate 200 billion people in 14 days? Even if every ship in the galaxy came to help, it would take months." The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew she was right. The mathematics of it were impossible. Even if they started evacuating immediately, they might save a few million people at most. The rest would die. Keela's legs seemed to give out and she sank to her knees. Tears ran down her violet cheeks. "My children are on that world," she whispered. "My parents, my friends, everyone I've ever loved. Please, there must be something you can do." The delegates looked at each other, but nobody spoke. What could they say? They had no answer to give her. Then, cutting through the heavy silence, a voice crackled over the communication system. It was different from the usual voices in the council, sharper, more direct. "We received your distress beacon." Every head in the chamber turned toward the main view screen. The automated system had picked up an incoming transmission and displayed it without asking permission first. That shouldn't have been possible. The council's communication systems were heavily secured. But somehow this signal had pushed right through all the security protocols. A face appeared on the screen. It was human. The council members stared. Humanity was still new to the galactic community. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel about 10 years ago and had been welcomed into the council 5 years after that. Most species barely knew anything about them except that they came from a small blue world on the edge of the galaxy and mostly kept to themselves. They attended council meetings but rarely spoke. They traded peacefully but didn't seem interested in making alliances. The human on the screen wore a dark uniform with silver insignia on the shoulders. She had short brown hair touched with gray and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. A name patch on her uniform read Stone. "I am Admiral Rebecca Stone of the Terran Defense Fleet," the human said. Her voice was calm and steady. We picked up the Tauran distress beacon 2 days ago. We're sending help. Chancellor Vorn found his voice first. Admiral Stone, with all respect to your offer, I don't think you understand the situation. The Krulthar swarm. Numbers in the trillions, Stone interrupted. Consumes all biological and technological matter. Has destroyed over 300 civilizations in recorded history. Average assault force contains between 5 and 8 trillion individual organisms supported by bioships the size of small moons. Yes, Chancellor, we've done our research. Keela stumbled to her feet, hope and disbelief warring on her face. Then you know this isn't something that can be fought. Even if you sent your entire fleet. Ambassador Keela, Stone said, and something in her tone made everyone in the chamber pay attention. When someone asks humanity for help, we don't calculate odds. We don't debate whether it's convenient. We don't abandon people because the situation looks difficult. You called for help. We're answering. But the Krulthar have destroyed civilizations that were thousands of years old, another council member protested. Species with weapons and technology far beyond what humanity possesses. What makes you think? Stone's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something hard and determined. Those civilizations fought to survive. We'll be fighting for something different. We'll be fighting for you. The council chamber erupted in confused voices. Several delegates tried to speak at once. Some were arguing that humanity was being foolish. Others were simply shocked that anyone would volunteer to face the swarm. Chancellor Vorn raised his hands for silence. When the chamber quieted, he addressed Stone again. Admiral, your courage is admirable, but sending your fleet against the swarm would be throwing away lives for no purpose. Even if you brought every ship Earth has, it wouldn't be enough. We're not bringing every ship Earth has, Stone replied. Then she paused, and the smallest hint of a smile touched her lips. We're bringing every ship the Terran Defense Fleet has. There's a difference. Before anyone could ask what she meant, Stone continued. Ambassador Keela, I need you to do something for us. Hold your defensive position around your homeworld. Don't evacuate yet. Keep your planetary shields at maximum and your defense stations active. Can you do that for 72 hours? Keela nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. Good, Stone said. Help is already on the way. You won't be alone much longer. She gave a short, sharp nod. Stone out. The transmission ended. The view screen went dark. For a long moment, nobody in the Galactic Council chamber moved or spoke. They all stared at the empty screen where the human admiral's face had been. Finally, Keela broke the silence. Do you think they'll really come? Her voice was small, like a child asking if a parent's promise was true. Chancellor Vorn's crystalline body shifted colors, showing his uncertainty. I don't know, Ambassador. Humanity is still largely unknown to us. But I have never heard of any species volunteering to face the Krulthar swarm before. Either they are the bravest beings in the galaxy, or they don't understand what they're facing. A delegate from a species of floating jellyfish-like creatures spoke up. Perhaps they're simply mad. Humans have a reputation for being unpredictable. Mad or not, Keela said quietly, they're the only ones who offer to help instead of just offering sympathy. She looked around at all the other delegates. They're the only ones who didn't tell me to just accept that my world is doomed. Nobody had an answer to that. Keela left the council chamber and returned to her small ship. As she traveled back toward her homeworld, she sent a message to the Tauran government telling them what had happened. She told them about the human admiral's promise. She told them to hold the defensive positions and wait. She didn't mention that she had no idea if the humans would really come or if they did, whether they would bring enough ships to make any difference at all. But for the first time since the Krulthar had appeared in their space, Keela allowed herself to feel something other than despair. She allowed herself to hope. 70 hours had passed since Admiral Stone's promise. Ambassador Keela stood in the planetary defense headquarters on the Tauran homeworld, staring at the main view screen that showed the empty darkness of space around their planet. She had barely slept in those 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw images of the Krulthar swarm consuming her world, eating everything and everyone she loved. The defense headquarters was built deep underground, protected by layers of reinforced metal and energy shields. Around her, dozens of Tauran military officers worked at their stations, monitoring sensors and coordinating what little defensive force they had. The room hummed with quiet tension. Everyone knew the swarm was coming. Everyone had seen what happened to the colony worlds. General Mox stood beside Keela, his violet skin darker than usual with stress. He was the senior military commander for the entire Tauran homeworld, responsible for coordinating all their defenses. But what defense could stop trillions of hungry creatures that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than theirs? Any sign of the humans? Keela asked for the 100th time. Mox shook his head. Nothing yet. Perhaps they realized the impossibility of what they promised. Perhaps they... He stopped mid-sentence. Every alarm in the headquarters started blaring at once. "General!" shouted a young technician at the sensor station. "Massive energy readings. Something's happening in Sector 7. On the main view screen, the image shifted to show the area of space the technician indicated. At first, Keela saw nothing unusual, just the normal backdrop of distant stars. Then space itself began to change. It started with a single point of light, bright blue and growing. Then another appeared beside it. And another. And another. Within seconds, hundreds of glowing points dotted the darkness, each one expanding like a flower opening its petals. These were hyperspace windows, tears in the fabric of normal space that allowed ships to travel faster than light. But Keela had never seen so many open at once. The windows grew larger and then ships began to emerge. Not one or two ships. Not even dozens. Hundreds of vessels poured through the glowing portals into normal space around the Tauran homeworld. They kept coming and coming, an endless stream of metal and power. "By the ancient stars," General Mox whispered, his eyes wide with shock. The ships were clearly human in design, but they looked nothing like the small exploration vessels that humanity had shown the galaxy before. These were warships. Big warships. Some were massive dreadnoughts that stretched for kilometers, their hulls covered in weapon batteries and armor plating. Others were sleeker destroyers that moved with predatory grace. Carrier ships the size of small cities launched swarms of fighter craft that filled space like schools of metal fish. "How many?" Keela asked, her voice barely a whisper. A technician frantically worked at her console, trying to count the arriving vessels. "Scanners are detecting 7,000 ships. No, wait, 7,200. 7,400. Her voice started shaking. "They're still coming through. The count keeps going up." More hyperspace windows opened. More ships emerged. The human fleet spread across the Tauran star system like a steel tide, moving with precise coordination. Each ship took up a specific position, creating layers of defensive formations around the planet. It was like watching a massive machine assemble itself in space. Keela watched the view screen in stunned silence. She had expected maybe a few dozen ships, a token force to help with evacuation, perhaps. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. This wasn't a rescue fleet. This was an armada. "Final count," the technician reported, her voice filled with disbelief. 7,342 vessels. All human. All armed. General Mox pulled up tactical displays, analyzing the human fleet's formation. His hands moved quickly across his controls, his military training taking over despite his shock. "Look at this," he said to Keela. "They're setting up overlapping defensive spheres around our world. Each ship is positioned to support the others. This isn't random, this is a carefully planned battle formation." A communications officer called out from across the room. "Ambassador Keela. Incoming transmission from the human fleet. It's Admiral Stone." "Put her through," Keela said, trying to keep her voice steady. The view screen shifted, and Admiral Stone's face appeared. But she looked different now. Instead of the dress uniform she had worn during their first conversation, Stone now wore full combat armor. It was black and silver, covered in equipment and weapons. Behind her, Keela could see the bridge of a massive warship. Human crew members moved efficiently at their stations, and display screens showed tactical information scrolling past in rapid streams of data. "Ambassador Keela," Stone said, and despite the armor and military surroundings, her voice remained calm and controlled. "This is Admiral Rebecca Stone aboard the Terran defense ship Indomitable, flagship of the First Response Fleet. We have established a defensive perimeter around your homeworld. All ships are in position and weapon systems are online." Keela found herself unable to speak for a moment. She looked at the tactical display showing thousands of human warships surrounding her world, then back at Stone's face on the screen. "Admiral," she finally managed to say, "we asked for help with evacuation. We thought maybe you would send some transport ships, or perhaps a few escorts to protect civilian vessels. We never expected. This is a war fleet." Stone's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something hard and determined. "You called for help, Ambassador. We don't do things halfway. When humanity commits to protecting someone, We bring everything we need to get the job done. But there are thousands of ships out there, General Mox interjected. How did you mobilize such a force so quickly? We've only been in contact for 3 days. We didn't mobilize it, Stone replied. This fleet was already assembled and ready to deploy. We've been preparing for something like this for years. Keela shook her head in confusion. Preparing? But humanity has only been part of the galactic community for 10 years. What were you preparing for? Stone was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of history. Ambassador, my species spent thousands of years fighting among ourselves. We built weapons capable of destroying our own world. We came very close to extinction more than once. When we finally achieved peace and reached for the stars, we made ourselves a promise. Never again would we stand by while others faced extinction. Never again would we fail to help when help was needed. She gestured to something off-screen, and the view shifted to show the bridge in more detail. Human officers worked at their stations with focused intensity. Every person on every ship in this fleet volunteered for this mission. When your distress call reached Earth, we asked for volunteers to face the Krulther swarm. Do you know how many people stepped forward? Keela shook her head. Everyone, Stone said simply. Every single member of our military volunteered. We had to turn people away. The crews you see here, they're not here because they were ordered to come. They're here because when they heard that 200 billion innocent people needed help, they couldn't imagine being anywhere else. A technician on the Tauran side called out urgently. General, long-range sensors are detecting movement. The Krulther Vanguard is approaching. Current speed and trajectory suggest arrival in 16 hours. General Mox's face went pale. 16 hours. That's faster than our original projections. Stone's jaw tightened. We know. Our sensors detected them too. That's why we came in hot and ready. Ambassador Keela, I need you to make sure all Tauran civilians are in shelters and your planetary shields are at maximum strength. Keep your defense stations active but don't engage the swarm until we give the signal. Let us handle the initial contact. Admiral, Keela said slowly, the Krulther Vanguard alone will number in the hundreds of millions. They'll be followed by the main swarm, trillions of creatures. Are you certain your fleet can? We're certain, Stone interrupted, and there was absolute conviction in her voice. The Krulther have spent millions of years consuming civilizations that tried to defend themselves or run away. They've never faced a species that came looking for a fight. They want war? We'll give them war. Human style. Behind Stone, someone called out a status report. She glanced over her shoulder, then looked back at Keela. I need to go. Battle preparations are entering final phase. But Ambassador, I want you to know something. What? Keela asked. Your people won't die today. Or tomorrow. Or any day while we still have ships that can fight. That's not a hope or a wish, that's a promise. Humanity keeps its promises. The transmission ended. The view screen returned to showing the tactical display of the human fleet surrounding the Tauran homeworld. Keela stood there, staring at the thousands of ship icons on the display. Each one represented hundreds or thousands of human beings who had traveled across the galaxy to fight for a species they barely knew. To protect people they had never met. General Mox was already shouting orders to his staff, coordinating Tauran forces with the human fleet. But he paused and looked at Keela with an expression she couldn't quite read. Do you think they can actually do it? He asked quietly. Can they really stop the swarm? Keela thought about Admiral Stone's face, about the absolute certainty in her voice. She thought about 7,000 warships filling space around her world, each one crewed by volunteers who had chosen to be there. I don't know if they can win, Keela admitted. But I know they believe they can. And right now, that's more than anyone else in the galaxy has offered us. Across the Tauran homeworld, billions of people looked up at their skies. Those on the day side couldn't see anything unusual, but those on the night side saw something that took their breath away. The darkness of space was filled with lights, thousands of them, arranged in patterns, surrounding their world like a protective shell. Human warships. For the first time in weeks since the Krulther swarm had first appeared in their space, the Tauran people felt something they had almost forgotten. 16 hours passed in tense preparation. The human fleet maintained its defensive formation around the Tauran homeworld while crew members performed final system checks and loaded weapons. In the Planetary Defense Headquarters, Ambassador Keela watched the long-range sensors with growing dread. A massive energy signature was approaching through deep space, moving faster than anything natural had a right to move. The Krulther Vanguard was coming. General Mox stood beside her, his violet hands gripping the edge of his console so tightly his knuckles had turned almost white. Around them, Tauran military officers worked quietly at their stations, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone knew what was approaching. Everyone had seen the reports from the destroyed colony worlds. "Contact in 3 minutes," a sensor technician announced, her voice barely steady. Keela opened a communication channel to the human flagship. Admiral Stone's face appeared on the screen immediately. The human admiral looked calm, almost relaxed, as if she were preparing for a routine training exercise rather than a battle against one of the most feared forces in the galaxy. "Admiral, long-range sensors show the Vanguard approaching. The numbers are..." Keela paused, struggling to put it into words. "There are so many of them." "We see them," Stone replied. "Don't worry, Ambassador. We've got this. Keep your people in shelters and your shields up. This is going to get loud." The transmission ended. Keela turned back to the main view screen, which now showed a tactical display of the space around their world. The human fleet was a constellation of green icons surrounding the planet. And approaching from deep space was a red mass that seemed to grow larger with each passing second. Then they arrived. The Krulthar Vanguard dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Tauran star system, and even through the cold electronic sensors, their appearance was terrifying. They didn't look like any normal spacecraft. They looked alive because they were. Each Krulthar warrior was a biomechanical horror, a blend of insect and machine that had been grown rather than built. They were roughly the size of human fighter craft, with bodies covered in black chitinous armor that seemed to absorb light. Multiple limbs extended from their central mass, each ending in razor-sharp claws or acid-spewing organic weapons. Their eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. And there were millions of them. The Vanguard moved together like a living tidal wave, flowing through space in patterns that seemed almost beautiful in their terrible coordination. They had used this same approach on hundreds of worlds over millions of years. Overwhelming numbers. Savage ferocity. No mercy. No hesitation. It had never failed before. In the defense headquarters, a young Tauran officer monitoring the tactical display let out a small gasp. "They're not slowing down. They're heading straight for us." General Mox pulled up a detailed scan of the approaching swarm. The computer tried to count individual Krulthar warriors but kept revising the number upward. 3 million. 5 million. 8 million. The mass of creatures was so dense they actually blocked out the light from distant stars. "This is what they do," an old Tauran historian said quietly from the corner of the room. His name was Elder Vex, and he had spent his entire life studying the Krulthar. "They don't negotiate. They don't communicate. They simply consume everything in their path. Every species that has faced them has tried to run or hide. None survived." Keela felt her heart pounding in her chest. The human fleet seemed so small compared to the approaching wave of nightmares. 7,000 ships against millions of living weapons. Then Admiral Stone's voice came through on the fleet-wide communication channel. It wasn't directed at the Tauran, it was broadcast to every human ship in the formation. "All vessels, this is Admiral Stone. The Krulthar Vanguard is entering our engagement zone. They think we're prey. They think this will be easy. They're about to learn why you don't mess with humanity. All batteries, weapons free. Show them what we brought them." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The human fleet held its formation, thousands of warships hanging motionless in space as millions of Krulthar warriors rushed toward them like a living tsunami. Then the humans opened fire. And space itself erupted into chaos. The first weapons to engage were the long-range railguns mounted on the human dreadnoughts. These weren't energy weapons or missiles. They were massive magnetic cannons that fired solid slugs of metal accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. When those projectiles hit something, the kinetic energy alone was devastating. The railgun slugs tore through the Krulthar formation like invisible punches from an angry god. Wherever a slug hit, dozens of warriors simply ceased to exist, their bodies vaporized by the impact. The slugs passed through multiple targets before their energy finally dissipated, each one carving a tunnel of destruction through the swarm. But the railguns were just the beginning. Missile pods along the flanks of human cruisers opened up, launching thousands of warheads into space. These weren't normal missiles. They were fusion-tipped smart weapons that could track targets and adjust their trajectory mid-flight. The missiles spread out across the battlefield, each one hunting for prey. When they found their targets, they detonated. Nuclear fire bloomed across the darkness of space like deadly flowers. Each explosion consumed hundreds of Krulthar warriors, the intense heat and radiation burning through their organic armor. The detonations came so fast and so close together that they created a rolling wave of destruction that swept through the Vanguard's leading edge. Then the energy weapons joined in. Laser batteries and particle beams lanced out from human warships, burning lines of brilliant light across the darkness. Wherever the beams touched a Krulthur warrior, the creature's armor boiled away and its body burst into flames. In the Tauren Defense Headquarters, General Mox stared at the tactical display with his mouth hanging open. The human fleet was pouring out such a volume of fire that the sensors were having trouble tracking it all. Every second, thousands of weapons discharged. Every second, more Krulthur warriors died. "This is incredible," breathed a Tauren tactical officer. "I've never seen weapons fire at this rate. The energy output alone should be impossible." But what shocked the Tauren observers even more was what the human fleet did next. Instead of maintaining their defensive position and firing from a safe distance, the human ships advanced. They moved forward into the swarm, their weapons never stopping, their formation holding steady despite the chaos around them. "They're attacking," General Mox said in disbelief. "They're not defending, they're advancing into the enemy." Human fighter craft screamed through the battlefield at speeds that should have been impossible. Their pilots pulled maneuvers that generated gravitational forces strong enough to kill most species, but the humans seemed to thrive on it. The small craft wove between larger ships and through clouds of Krulthur warriors, their weapons spitting fire constantly. Each human fighter was small, barely larger than the Krulthur warriors themselves, but they carried an absurd amount of firepower. Missiles, energy weapons, kinetic cannons, every fighter was a flying weapons platform, and their pilots used every system without hesitation. A group of Krulthur warriors tried to surround a squadron of human fighters, attempting to overwhelm them with numbers. The human pilots didn't scatter or retreat. Instead, they formed up tighter and flew straight through the center of the Krulthur formation, their weapons firing in all directions. When they emerged from the other side, the Krulthur formation was gone, nothing left but burning debris. The battle had been raging for less than 20 minutes, and already the Krulthur vanguard was being torn apart. But the swarm had numbers on their side, and they pressed forward with mindless determination. Millions of warriors pushed through the human fire, accepting horrific casualties to get closer to the planet they wanted to consume. A wing of several thousand Krulthur broke through a gap in the human fighter screen, finding a path toward the Tauren homeworld. They accelerated, their acid weapons already preparing to fire, their claws flexing in anticipation of the feast to come. "They're through," shouted a Tauren officer. "Multiple contacts heading directly for the planet." General Mox slammed his fist on the console. "Activate planetary defense batteries. All stations prepare to engage." But before the Tauren weapons could even track their targets, 3 human destroyers moved to intercept. These weren't the massive dreadnoughts or the carrier ships. These were mid-sized vessels, each about half a kilometer long, designed for speed and firepower. The 3 destroyers positioned themselves directly in the path of the oncoming Krulthur wing. They didn't try to dodge or maintain a safe distance. They simply stopped and turned to face the approaching swarm head-on. "What are they doing?" Kila whispered. "They're sacrificing their defensive position. The Krulthur will tear through their shields at that range." The destroyers opened fire at point-blank range. Every weapon they had activated simultaneously, railguns, missiles, energy beams, defensive point lasers, even their close-in weapon systems designed for intercepting incoming fire. The 3 ships created a wall of destruction between the Krulthur and the planet. The Krulthur warriors flew straight into that wall and simply ceased to exist. The combined firepower was so intense that space itself seemed to burn. The destroyers' shields flickered and failed under the assault, their armor taking direct hits from Krulthur acid weapons, but they didn't move. They didn't retreat. They held their position until every single Krulthur warrior in that wing had been destroyed. When the last enemy fell, the 3 destroyers were heavily damaged. Scorch marks covered their hulls. Entire sections were venting atmosphere into space. But they had done their job, not a single Krulthur had gotten past them. Ambassador Kila felt tears running down her violet cheeks as she watched those 3 damaged ships slowly turn and begin limping back toward the main fleet for repairs. "Why?" she asked aloud, her voice breaking. "Why would they risk their ships like that? They could have fallen back and let our planetary defenses handle it. Why would they put themselves in danger?" Elder Vex, the old historian, stepped closer to the view screen. His ancient eyes were fixed on the human fleet, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with wonder. "Because they meant what they said, Ambassador. When they promised to protect us, they didn't mean they would try their best or do what was convenient. They meant they would stand between us and harm, no matter the cost to themselves. That is what humanity does. That is who they are." The battle continued for 4 more hours. The human fleet maintained its relentless assault, never giving ground, never slowing their rate of fire. They fought with a precision and determination that seemed almost impossible. Ships coordinated their fire to maximize damage. Fighters covered each other with perfect timing. When one vessel's shields failed, others moved to protect it while it regenerated. The Krulthar Vanguard, for all its millions of warriors and millions of years of success, had never faced anything like this. They were designed to overwhelm and consume. They had no strategy beyond throwing bodies at a problem until the problem stopped existing. But humanity fought differently. Every shot was calculated. Every movement had purpose. They didn't just fight to survive, they fought to win. When the last Krulthar warrior of the Vanguard finally fell, destroyed by a precision strike from a human missile, the battlefield fell quiet. The space around the Tauren homeworld was filled with debris and the fading glow of cooling wreckage, but it was over. The Vanguard had been completely annihilated. Not a single Krulthar had reached the planet's atmosphere. In the defense headquarters, every Tauren officer sat in stunned silence, staring at their displays. They had just witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. The Krulthar Vanguard, the same force that had consumed 6 colony worlds, had been destroyed in a single engagement. General Mox slowly turned to look at Ambassador Keela. His face showed shock, relief, and something else. Respect. They did it, he said simply. The humans actually did it. But Elder Vex's expression was troubled. He had studied the Krulthar longer than anyone alive and he knew their patterns. The Vanguard was just a scouting force, he said quietly. The main swarm is still coming. And it will be 1,000 times larger than what we just saw. Everyone in the room fell silent again, the brief moment of hope fading. They had won this battle, yes. But the war was far from over. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Stone reviewed the battle reports. Her fleet had taken damage. 5 destroyers heavily damaged, multiple fighters lost, and several larger ships would need repairs. But the Vanguard was gone, and her people had proven they could fight these creatures and win. She opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, excellent work. Begin damage control and resupply operations. We have 48 hours before the main swarm arrives. She paused, then added, and when it gets here we're going to show it the same thing we showed the Vanguard. Nobody threatens innocent people while humanity has ships that can fight. Nobody. Across the human fleet, tired but determined crew members returned to their posts. They had just won a battle that the galaxy thought was impossible. Now they had to prepare to do it again. Against odds 1,000 times worse. The 2 days between the Vanguard's destruction and the arrival of the main swarm passed in a blur of frantic activity. The human fleet worked around the clock, repairing damaged vessels, resupplying ammunition, and preparing for what everyone knew would be the real test. In the Tauren Defense Headquarters, Ambassador Keela barely left her post, watching the long-range sensors with growing dread as a massive energy signature approached through deep space. This signature was different from the Vanguard. It was bigger. Much bigger. Elder Vex stood beside her, his ancient eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. He had studied the Krulthar for his entire long life, and he recognized what was coming. The main swarm, he said quietly. I had hoped, but no. They're sending everything. General Mox looked up from his tactical console, his violet face pale. How large are we talking? Larger than any force they've deployed in recorded history, Vex replied. They must see the humans as a genuine threat. They're not taking chances. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council watched the unfolding situation with horror. They had access to long-range sensors that showed them what was approaching the Tauren homeworld, and the numbers were beyond comprehension. Emergency sessions were called. Delegates argued and shouted at each other, but in the end they all agreed on one thing. The humans needed to retreat. Now, before it was too late. Chancellor Vorn himself sent the message to Admiral Stone. His crystalline form flickered with anxious energy as he recorded the transmission. Admiral Stone, our sensors have detected the full Krulthar swarm approaching your position. The numbers are... He paused, struggling to find words. There are trillions of them. Trillions. Along with bioships that are each the size of small moons. No military force in recorded galactic history has ever faced numbers like this and survived. Please retreat while you still have time. You've done more than anyone could have asked. There's no shame in withdrawing now. Other council members sent similar messages. Some begged. Some pleaded. Some simply stated the mathematical reality that no fleet of 7,000 ships could stand against trillions of enemies. Admiral Stone's response came back within the hour. It was brief, just 7 words, but those words would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations to come. We're not history. We're humanity. Then she cut the transmission and went back to preparing her fleet for battle. 48 hours after the Vanguard's destruction, the main Krulthar swarm arrived at the edge of the Tauran star system. And when it did, even the humans fell silent at the sheer scale of what they were facing. The swarm didn't emerge all at once. Instead, hyperspace windows opened continuously for over an hour, each one disgorging millions of Krulthar warriors. They came in waves that seemed to have no end, filling space with their biomechanical bodies until the darkness between stars was replaced by a writhing mass of chitin and claws. In the defense headquarters, a Tauran technician tried to count the individual Krulthar using the computer systems. The number climbed rapidly, millions became billions, billions became trillions. Eventually, the computer stopped trying to count individuals and simply estimated the total mass of the swarm. It's the equivalent of a small moon, the technician whispered in horror. The swarm has more mass than one of our planetary satellites. But the warriors weren't even the worst part. Behind them came the bioships. These weren't vessels in any traditional sense. They were living creatures, grown over millennia to serve as mobile bases for the swarm. Each bioship was enormous. The smallest was 30 kilometers across, and the largest was over 200 kilometers in diameter. Their surfaces were covered in organic weapons and launch bays that continuously released more warriors. There were dozens of these monstrosities, and they moved through space with the slow, inevitable momentum of celestial bodies. The Krulthar swarm that assembled at the edge of the Tauran system represented millions of years of evolution and conquest. This was the collective intelligence that had consumed hundreds of civilizations. This was the nightmare that had haunted the galaxy since before most current species had even developed tool use. And it had come to eat everything in the star system. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Stone stood before the main view screen, watching the swarm assemble. Her senior officers stood around her, their faces grim but determined. Nobody spoke. The scale of what they were facing seemed to defy words. Finally, Commander Lisa Park broke the silence. She was Stone's second in command, a veteran of Earth's last major conflict before humanity had achieved global peace. "Admiral," she said quietly, "we're receiving updated projections from the tactical computer. Current Krulthar numbers exceed 3 trillion individual warriors, plus the bioships. Our fleet? We have 7,000 vessels. The computer is having trouble even calculating the odds." Stone didn't look away from the screen. "Tell the computer to stop calculating odds. We're not here to calculate. We're here to fight." Another officer spoke up. "Ma'am, the Galactic Council is right. We could retreat now, regroup, maybe develop new weapons and leave 200 billion Tauran to die?" Stone turned to face her crew. "We made a promise. Humanity keeps its promises." She activated the fleet-wide communication system, her voice reaching every ship under her command. "All vessels, this is Admiral Stone. I know what you're seeing. I know the numbers look impossible. Every tactical computer in the fleet is probably telling you we can't win this fight." She paused. "But here's what those computers don't understand about humanity. We've faced impossible odds before. Every time people told us to give up. Every time logic said we couldn't win. And every time we proved them wrong." Her voice grew stronger. "The Krulthar have spent millions of years consuming civilizations that tried to run away or hide behind their defenses. They've never faced a species that looked at impossible odds and decided to attack anyway. Today they learn what humanity is capable of. Today we show them why you don't threaten innocent people while we still have ships that can fight." In the Tauran Defense Headquarters, General Mox had gained access to the human tactical network, something the humans had openly shared with their Tauran allies. He pulled up the battle plans that the human commanders had been developing, expecting to see detailed defensive strategies and fallback positions. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. The humans weren't planning a defense. They were planning an all-out assault on the swarm itself. "This is insane," he muttered, loud enough that Ambassador Keela heard him. "What is?" she asked, moving to look at his display. Mox pointed at the tactical projections. "Look at this. The human fleet is going to reorganize into a multi-layered sphere formation, with their largest ships at the center. Then they're going to..." He paused, checking the data again to make sure he was reading it correctly. "Then they're going to fly directly into the center of the swarm and attack from the inside out." Keela stared at the battle plan in disbelief. "That's suicide. They'll be surrounded completely. There will be no escape route." "They're not planning an escape route," Mox said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "They're planning to keep fighting until either the swarm is destroyed or they are." Before Keela could respond, Admiral Stone's voice came through on all frequencies, human and Tauran alike. She was broadcasting to everyone, making sure her message was heard. Every species the Krulthar destroyed believed survival meant running away or hiding, Stone said. They were wrong. Survival doesn't mean avoiding the fight. Survival means making your enemy fear you more than you fear them. Today we teach the swarm a lesson they'll carry for the rest of their existence, however long that is. Humanity protects its own. And we don't lose. The human fleet began to move. 7,000 warships reorganized themselves into a new formation unlike anything the Tauran had ever seen. They formed concentric spheres, each layer of ships positioned to support the ones ahead of it. The pattern was beautiful in its precision. Every vessel knew exactly where to be, every captain understood their role in the larger strategy. At the center of the formation, the largest human dreadnoughts began charging their main weapons. These were the Planet Killer class ships, vessels designed to crack the crust of worlds if necessary. Energy built up in their main batteries, and the space around them began to shimmer and distort from the power output. The human fleet didn't wait for the swarm to come to them. As one unified force, they accelerated forward, heading directly toward the mass of Krulthar warriors and bioships. The swarm responded immediately. Trillions of warriors surged forward to meet them, moving in coordinated patterns directed by the collective intelligence that controlled them. The bioships launched additional waves of fighters and began charging their own organic weapons. The two forces collided in a battle that would be studied for generations to come. The humans opened fire first, and the volume of weapons discharged was staggering. Every ship fired every weapon simultaneously: railguns, missiles, energy beams, kinetic cannons, everything. The combined firepower lit up space like a newborn star. Krulthar warriors died by the millions in the first few seconds. But there were trillions of them, and they kept coming, accepting horrific casualties without hesitation or fear. They swarmed around the human fleet like angry insects, attacking from all sides at once. But the human formation held. The outer layers of ships focused on point defense, their weapons creating overlapping fields of fire that destroyed anything that got too close. The middle layers targeted the larger concentrations of enemies, breaking up mass attacks before they could build momentum. And the inner layer, the dreadnoughts, fired their massive main weapons at the bioships themselves. When a planet killer beam hit one of the bioships, the results were catastrophic. The organic armor boiled away instantly, and the creature's interior exploded from the sudden energy transfer. One bioship, over 60 kilometers across, simply broke apart into burning fragments that scattered across thousands of kilometers of space. The Krulthar swarm adapted quickly. They had been evolving for millions of years, and their collective intelligence learned from every encounter. They began releasing massive clouds of acid that could eat through ship armor, forcing the human vessels to navigate around the toxic zones. The humans responded by flying straight through the acid clouds anyway. Their armor had been designed to withstand atmospheric re-entry at high speeds and exposure to the radiation of dying stars. The Krulthar acid damaged them, yes, but it didn't stop them. Ships emerged from the toxic clouds with their hulls scarred and smoking, but their weapons still firing. When the swarm tried to overwhelm the human formation with pure numbers, surrounding them from all directions at once, the humans activated weapon systems they had kept in reserve until now. Antimatter torpedoes. These weapons were banned by most civilized species because of their sheer destructive potential. Each torpedo contained a small amount of antimatter suspended in a magnetic field. When the field collapsed on impact, matter and antimatter annihilated each other, releasing energy equivalent to a fusion bomb. The human fleet launched hundreds of these weapons simultaneously. When they detonated, entire sections of the Krulthar swarm simply ceased to exist, erased in blinding flashes of pure energy that left nothing behind but radiation and expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The battle raged across millions of kilometers of space, but some Krulthar warriors inevitably broke through the human defensive lines. They headed for the Tauran homeworld, seeking to fulfill their primary purpose: consume and multiply. What they found waiting for them was something they hadn't anticipated: human ground forces. Drop pods fell from orbit like metal rain, each one carrying armored marines to the planet's surface. The pods hit the ground in the outer colonies where Krulthar warriors had begun landing, and hatches blew open to release soldiers wearing combat armor that made them look like walking tanks. Each marine stood over 2 meters tall in their powered armor. They carried weapons that could punch through reinforced steel and moved with enhanced strength that let them fight hand-to-hand with creatures twice their size. And they were absolutely fearless. In a small Tauran farming settlement, A squad of 12 human marines formed a defensive line in front of several hundred Tauran civilians who were trying to evacuate. The Krulthar warriors came at them in a wave, over 100 creatures with razor-sharp claws and acid weapons. The Marines held their ground and fought. Their squad leader was a veteran named Commander Tyler Hayes. He had fought in Earth's last major war and had volunteered for this mission the moment he heard about the Tauran situation. Now he stood at the front of his squad, his heavy rifle firing in controlled bursts, each shot killing a Krulthar warrior. "Hold the line," he shouted to his team. "Civilians are still evacuating. Nobody gets through." A massive Krulthar warrior broke through the initial defensive fire and charged directly at Hayes. He didn't retreat. He dropped his rifle, drew a combat knife that vibrated at ultrasonic frequencies, and met the creature head-on. The fight was brutal and brief. Hayes took serious damage to his armor, but the Krulthar ended up in pieces on the ground. When reinforcements finally arrived 20 minutes later, they found Hayes and his squad still standing, still fighting, surrounded by the bodies of over 50 dead Krulthar. Hayes had taken so much damage that his armor was barely functional, and he was bleeding from multiple wounds. The medic rushed to him immediately. "Commander, we need to get you to medical right now." Hayes grabbed the medic's arm with what little strength he had left. "The civilians?" he rasped through his damaged helmet. "Are they safe? Did they all make it out?" "Yes, sir, every single one." "You held long enough." Only then did Hayes allow himself to collapse. Stories like this played out across multiple Tauran colonies. Wherever Krulthar warriors broke through to the surface, they found human marines waiting. And those marines fought with a determination that seemed impossible to the Tauran who witnessed it. They took injuries that would kill most species and kept fighting. They faced impossible odds without hesitation. They protected civilians they had never met before with their own lives. The battle in space continued for 6 full days. 6 days of continuous combat without pause. 6 days of the human fleet fighting against odds that no computer could calculate. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The Krulthar swarm, for all its trillions of warriors and millions of years of evolution, had never faced an enemy like this. They were designed to overwhelm and consume. But humanity fought with coordination, strategy, and an absolute refusal to quit that the swarm's collective intelligence couldn't comprehend. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting with half their systems offline. Pilots who should have been dead from exhaustion flew combat missions for days straight, kept alert by sheer willpower and combat stimulants. Every person in the human fleet pushed past their limits and kept pushing. By the 6th day, the Krulthar swarm had lost over 40% of its total mass. 15 bioships had been destroyed. The collective intelligence that directed the swarm began to recognize something it had never experienced before. It was losing. In the defense headquarters, General Mox and Ambassador Keela watched the tactical displays with expressions of wonder. The human fleet was battered, damaged, and running low on ammunition. But the Krulthar swarm was breaking apart, its coordination failing, its numbers finally starting to thin. "They're actually doing it," Mox whispered. "The humans are actually winning." Elder Vex stood nearby, tears running down his old face. "In all my years of study across all of recorded history, no one has ever defeated the full Krulthar swarm in direct combat. No one. Until now." On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Stone reviewed the latest battle reports. Her fleet had taken heavy casualties, over 2,000 ships damaged or destroyed, tens of thousands of crew members killed or wounded. But they had held. They had fought. And they were winning. She opened a fleet-wide channel one more time. "All ships, this is Admiral Stone. I know you're tired. I know you've given everything you have and more. But we're almost there. The swarm is breaking. One more push and we end this. For the Tauran. For humanity. For everyone who ever needed help and didn't get it. Finish this fight." The human fleet surged forward one final time, weapons blazing, engines screaming, every remaining crew member pushing past exhaustion to deliver one last devastating assault. And the Krulthar swarm finally broke. The Krulthar swarm had been feeding on worlds for millions of years. They moved through the galaxy like locusts, consuming everything in their path. No species had ever stopped them. Most didn't even try. But on the 7th day of the battle for Tauran, something impossible happened. The swarm retreated. Their massive bioships, built from the bodies of consumed civilizations, turned away from the planet. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Krulthar made a choice based on calculation rather than hunger. The prey had become too dangerous. The cost had become too high. Humanity had achieved something no other species ever had. They made genocide economically inefficient. As the last alien vessels disappeared into the darkness of hyperspace, the Tauran homeworld erupted in chaos. But it wasn't the chaos of panic or despair. It was celebration. Pure, unfiltered joy. Billions of beings who had written their final messages and said their last goodbyes suddenly had tomorrow again. Children who had hidden in bunkers came out to see the sky. Elders who had prepared for the end stood in the streets, unable to believe they were still breathing. The human warships remained in orbit, their weapons still hot, their crews still at battle stations. They weren't leaving until they were absolutely certain the threat was gone. Down on the surface, at the main landing platform of the Tauran capital, Ambassador Keela waited. The platform was scarred with blast marks from the fighting. Pieces of destroyed Krulthar drones still littered the edges. But the danger had passed. A human shuttle descended through the atmosphere, its hull blackened from combat. When the doors opened, Admiral Stone stepped out. Her armor was dented and scorched. Burn marks covered her shoulder plates. Her face showed the kind of exhaustion that comes from days without sleep, from making life and death decisions every few minutes, from watching people under your command die while you kept giving orders. But she walked with her head up. Her people had done what they came to do. Keela approached slowly. The Tauran ambassador had spent weeks preparing speeches, planning ceremonies, organizing formal thanks. All of that felt meaningless now. There was only one question that mattered. Why? Keela asked. The word came out barely louder than a whisper. We are nothing to your people. Strangers you never met. We offered you nothing in return. No trade agreements. No alliances. No resources. Why did you risk everything for us? Stone turned to look at the city in the distance. The celebration was spreading. Lights that had been dark for days were coming back on. Music was starting to play. People were gathering in the streets, holding each other, crying with relief. Above them, human warships circled like protective eagles, making sure nothing could threaten this moment of joy. You asked for help, Stone said simply. She looked back at Keela, and the Tauran ambassador saw something in her eyes. Not pride or arrogance. Something deeper. Something that came from pain. And we remember what it's like to face the end alone. She gestured toward her fleet in orbit. Thousands of ships. Hundreds of thousands of humans who had traveled across the galaxy for people they'd never met. Humanity spent most of our history destroying ourselves, Stone continued. We fought wars over borders, over resources, over ideas, over gods we made up. We turned our own planet into a graveyard more times than we can count. Cities burned. Civilizations fell. We perfected the art of killing each other in ways that would make the Krulthar seem merciful. Keela listened in silence. This wasn't what she expected to hear. But all that blood taught us something, Stone said. All that suffering burned a lesson into our DNA. 2 lessons, actually. First, the only thing worth fighting for is protecting people who can't protect themselves. All those wars we fought for power or profit or pride. They were meaningless. But fighting to save innocent lives? That's the only battle that matters. She paused, watching a group of Tauran children playing near the platform. They were laughing. A week ago they would all be dead. The second lesson? Stone's voice got harder. When you fight for something that actually matters, you don't hold back. You don't send a small force and hope for the best. You don't calculate minimum effort. You bring everything you have. Every ship. Every weapon. Every soldier willing to stand between the innocent and the darkness. And you don't stop until the job is finished. Keela felt something break inside her chest. Relief maybe. Or gratitude so deep it hurt. You called for help, Stone said. We brought a war armada because that's what help looks like when humanity answers. Anything less would have been an insult to your need. The story of the battle for Tauran spread across the galaxy faster than light. Every species heard about it. The details changed depending on who told it, but the core truth remained the same. Humanity, the newcomers, the species that barely qualified for galactic membership, had stopped the unstoppable. The Krulthar swarm changed their behavior for the first time in eons. They avoided sectors where human ships patrolled. They added new calculations to their collective intelligence. If humans protected, the resources cost too much. Other aggressive species took note. Expansion plans were quietly shelved. Invasion schedules were reconsidered. Because humanity had demonstrated something terrifying to predators. They would travel across the galaxy to fight for strangers. What would they do for their own? And the desperate species, the ones facing extinction, began changing their distress beacons. They stopped sending them to the Galactic Council, where bureaucrats would debate and delay. They pointed them toward Earth. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. They invited Admiral Stone to attend, which was unusual, Humans were barely members. They certainly weren't decision-makers. The council chambers were built to intimidate. Massive screens showed thousands of member species. Ancient races that had ruled star systems before humanity discovered fire. Empires that controlled sectors of space containing trillions of beings. They all wanted to ask the same question. The council speaker, a being so old their species' name was forgotten, addressed Stone directly. Does humanity intend to become the galaxy's military force? Are you claiming the right to intervene wherever you choose? Stone looked around the chamber. At the ancient species who had watched the Tauran genocide begin and done nothing. At the powerful empires who had debated while children died. At the civilizations who had made peace by accepting that some species simply had to be sacrificed. We don't seek to rule anyone, Stone said clearly. We don't want to control galactic policy. We don't want your territories or your trade routes or your resources. She let that sink in. Then she continued. But when someone calls for help, we will answer. And we will always bring enough force to make sure that help actually means something. Not token support. Not symbolic gestures. Not thoughts and prayers. Real help. The kind that stops predators and saves lives. The chamber erupted in debate. Some species were relieved. Others were concerned. A few were terrified. Because humanity had just announced they would act regardless of council approval. But the desperate species, the ones facing threats they couldn't handle alone, they heard something different. They heard hope. On Tauran, the celebration lasted for weeks. Eventually the human fleet prepared to leave. They had other calls to answer, other species requesting protection. Before they departed, the Tauran erected something at the landing site where the first human soldiers had touched down. It wasn't fancy. The Tauran were simple people who valued substance over decoration. They built a statue of a single human soldier, standing at attention, weapon ready, looking out toward the sky. Guarding. Protecting. Ready. The inscription was carved in both Tauran script and English. They called for help. Humanity arrived with a war armada. And the darkness learned to fear the light. Ambassador Keela visited the statue often in the years that followed. She would stand there and remember the day her entire species accepted death. And she would remember the moment she learned they weren't alone in the universe after all. Because humanity had proven something the galaxy had forgotten over millions of years of careful diplomacy and calculated compromises. Sometimes peace requires the willingness to wage war. Sometimes compassion means bringing overwhelming force. Sometimes the best answer to a cry for help isn't negotiation or sanctions or sternly worded statements. Sometimes the best answer is an armada. The age of humanity's isolation had ended. The age of humanity's protection had begun. And across the galaxy, species facing extinction looked toward Earth and dared to hope. Because when humanity heard a call for help, they didn't send bureaucrats or diplomats or carefully worded expressions of concern. They sent warships. Thousands of them. With one simple message: you are not alone anymore.